I know we've had a crazy week. I don't know what you guys know. Graduations yesterday at the high school, and we had graduations. I know everyone's, just exhausted and wiped out, and just been a crazy week. Yesterday was our last day here at CCA, the last official day of school, and Jason's wife, Jennifer, was playing Dodge the Sponge. They had wet sponges and they were trying to throw it at each other. And she turned on her ankle and broke the tibia and the fibia and dislocated the foot. And so she went to the emergency room last night. They kept her. They're doing emergency surgery. I guess they call it emergency surgery, but they're today at 5:30 or so, they took her back. So keep Jennifer in your prayers. And it was not pretty. I just looked at it and I went, oh, Jesus, help me not to faint. It was gnarly. and then, and it's that one time a year where we had all the staff pastors get together and we played the high school team. And man, I'll tell you what, I got some moves in my mind. They're not in my body anymore, but I know what I wanted to do. I know what I was thinking I was doing. It just didn't come out that way. It just my move to the basket so I'm limping a little bit. Yeah. Numbers chapter 32. If you have a Bible, every time we come to a new chapter, I'm thinking I'm going to take at least 2 or 3 chapters, and here we come to Numbers chapter 32, and wow, what a lesson for us this evening. And I think it's one of those lessons that is hidden within the text that I think that is just an incredible reminder for all of us. It just what the Lord is asking of the children of Israel, and the temptation to not fulfill the things that God puts before us. And I entitled the message, Don't Settle. And I think it's one of the dangers that the children of Israel will be facing, not just here, but as they go into the promised land, because God tells them that He's given them all the land. And the tendency is to secure the area that is going to be needed, and then kind of not worry about the outskirts, or not to worry about all the other pieces of property that are still to be conquered. And the children of Israel are going to fail in that arena as well. But what's incredible as we come to this text is that there's 2 tribes that have a plan to not enter the promised land. And we're going to get their story right here. But in that whole picture, I think for all of us, what a challenge for us today. That how easy is it for us to get comfortable rather than to strive to finish the race that God's put before us. That you kind of get to a place where everything's going good, and now we're not under such distress. There's not so much of a need as before, and when we had to pray every day for our food or for our house payment, we kind of have a little bit of relief. And then when that relief comes, the tendency for all of us is to go, man, now I can put it on cruise control rather than finish the battle that I'm in, and really continue striving for the things that God has for us. And I think it's an incredible picture here, because they're now at the border of Jordan. And they're able to look into the promised land from where they're camping at this point. They can see Jericho. They can see all of the fields and the land that's flowing with milk and honey. And all of it is now within grasp. And two of the tribes have a change of heart. And that's really what this chapter is all about. Look at chapter 32. Let's begin in verse 1. We'll read verses 1 through 5, and then we'll come back and we'll expound on it. It's in the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock. And when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place of livestock, the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and they spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and the leaders of the congregation, saying, Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elilah, Sheban, Nebo, and Dion, or Beon. That's the different guys. Dion and there's a band, but that's not them. Beon. The country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel is the land of livestock, and your servants have livestock. Therefore, they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servant as a possession. Look what he says at the end here. Do not take us over the Jordan. And one of the things you notice, concerning these two tribes, Reuben and Gad, and we'll see by the time we get to the end of the chapter, half the tribe of Manasseh is also going to join them in this request to want to stay on this side of the Jordan rather than cross the Jordan and come into the promised land. And it's where the area that you and I would call Jordan now. It's called Transjordan. It's in the area just on the other side of the Jordan River. And what's incredible as you look at this whole picture is that they're now operating everything they're doing on what they see. Now notice what it said there in verse 1 of chapter 32. They saw the land of Jazer. And the thing that they're going to base their decision upon and where they're willing to settle for was they're willing to settle for the things that they saw rather than the things that God wanted for them. Well, what a temptation that is. Really think about what they're saying. We're pretty comfortable right where we're at. All of this land is good for grazing. We can raise our cattle. And, rather than going into the promised land with you guys, we're content to stay right here where we're at. And anytime you're going to live your life by sight, you're going to always miss what God has for you. Remember Adam and Eve in the garden. It was Eve who saw that the food was good for food, that the fruit was good for food. And it says that she ate of it, and because of it, the fall now entered the world. Sin now entered the world because what she saw with her eyes was of higher importance than what God said. Remember Lot, when Abraham and Lot were standing on top of the hill, and there wasn't enough room for Abraham's herds and Lot's herds, and Abraham turns to Lot and he says, Lot, whatever you choose, I'll go the other way. And it says that Lot saw the land that was in the valley of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he chose that for him. Little ground where they're at, and they realize that we need grass, we need hay, we need all of the livestock, all of the fields in order to feed the livestock we have, and everything's right here. Why are we going to go anywhere else? Everything we need is right here. I like what one commentator said. He says, in effect, they were asking to settle down somewhere other than where God had called them to live because it was more suitable for their lifestyle. And we are tempted to choose our spouses based on their looks rather than Christian character, or our careers based on their income potential rather than the opportunity to use our gifts to serve our community. We're tempted to spend vast amounts of money on clothing and cars and accessories of an affluent lifestyle instead of investing our treasures in heavenly causes. Because really, depending on what your priority is going to be, what you see or what you know, is going to determine really what you pursue. And one of the things that you notice amongst these guys is that it was really easy to say, man, we got livestock. This land is perfect for livestock. Let's just hang out here. And they brought this request to Moses. And they brought this request to the high priest who was there at that time, and all of the elders. And they said, you know what, we have a great idea. We're just going to stay right in this location rather than go where God's instructed us to go. Now, I mean, one of the other things that I thought was important here is that they were allowing their possessions to determine their inheritance. Their possessions were rather than God determining their inheritance, they were allowing their possessions to determine their inheritance. We got a lot of, now what if they only had a little bit of livestock? Well, then we're willing to go into the promised land. But because we have a lot of livestock, we're gonna kind of hang out right here. And I think it's always a danger when we allow, our circumstances, our situation, or even our possessions to determine what God wants us to do rather than being faithful to do what God's asked us to do. You see, God had told them they were to go into the promised land. And everything they were doing now was settling for something less than God had for them. And so Moses is going to be confronted with this situation. And, I think along those lines, guys, you kind of look at, it's a lot easier to be faithful with a little than it is to be faithful with much. Think about that. I can't, how many times people go, well, if I make, if I'm supposed to give to the Lord and I'm going to tithe and I make $300 a week, that means I give $30 a week to the Lord. Yeah, that's pretty much, that's what a tithe is. You give 10%, $330 a week. That's great. Now, when you start making $3,000 a week, now you want me to give $300 a week to the Lord? No, that's a lot of money. That's $1,200 a month, right? And you kind of, it changes the whole perspective. Rather than $120 a month, I'm giving $1,200. Oh, no, that's different. To be faithful with the little things, but if you're not faithful with the little things, you'll never be faithful when you have much. And so what's incredible is that God at this point is telling them, this is what I have for you, but they're allowing their possessions to determine their faithfulness. And so Moses is going to confront them. And I love Moses' response to the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, because he's not going to hold back any punches. He's going to be very, very forthright about their circumstance and their situation. Remember what they're asking. We don't want to go with you guys to the promised land. We want to stay on this side of the Jordan. You guys, just you go for it, and we'll be here cheering you on. That's basically what they're saying. And notice what Moses says. Look at verse 6. And Moses said to the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Let me get this straight. You're saying is that you're willing for all of the other tribes, the other 10, to go into this battle, but you're not going to go into the battle with them? Really? And what Moses is saying is that you guys are not only being lazy, but you're being unfaithful to the rest of your brethren. And that's a heavy charge, isn't it? You guys are willing to just sit back while everyone else goes to war. Jesus would use a parable in Luke chapter 16 and verse 9, and this is what he would say. I say to you, make friends for yourself by unrighteous mammon, and when you fail, that you may receive they receive you into an everlasting home. For he who is faithful and was the least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you've been unfaithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the true riches? Jesus is going, look, if you can't be faithful with the little thing, and I think it's Moses telling them the very same thing. Look, you guys are willing to send all of your brethren to war so that you don't have to go to war? That's how you're really going to operate here. And Jesus, would give that command really to his disciples. If you can't be faithful with the little things, how am I going to trust with you greater things? If you can't be faithful with the $30, how can you be faithful with the 300? If you're not going to be faithful with the little. And what's incredible is that they were allowing the cares of the world to dictate their direction rather than their care for God. And notice in Moses, that was his first rebuke. He was just, you guys are going to let your brothers go into battle, and you're going to sit here and watch. And then he says this, look at verse 7. The second thing he says, now, why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? And I thought, man, what an incredible exhortation that is. Your actions are going to discourage the rest of the tribes from being faithful in what they're doing and what God's asked them to do. What a reminder for all of us, guys, that our influence influences others. What you do is going to have an impact on what others do, because if you start pulling back from what God's asked you to do, it's going to have an impact upon others that are watching you. And they too can be discouraged. Each of us has a part to play in the spiritual temperature of the congregation. Think about that. Each of us has a part to play in the spiritual temperature of the congregation. Q. Hent in his commentary says this: the decision to settle down comfortably to enjoy what we have without any thoughts of God's call on our lives never simply affects ourselves. It affects our brothers and our sisters in the church as well. If I am cool toward God, comfortably satisfied with what I already have, then the coolness will dampen my neighbor's enthusiasm for God. Equally, if I am on fire for the Lord, passionately pursuing a life of holiness and service, then something of that heat will radiate out to those around me. We never live our lives in a vacuum. Our commitment or lack of commitment affects the body as a whole. And that's exactly what Moses is telling Reuben and Dan. He's saying, look, if you guys decide you're not going to go to war with us, the other 10 tribes are going to be discouraged to go to war too. And if you're not going to be faithful with what God's asked you to do, it's going to have an impact upon your other brothers and your other sisters in what God's asked them to do. Wow. And I like what Moses says at the end of that verse 7. He says, the land which the Lord has given them. Guys, the land on that side of the Jordan wasn't the promised land. It wasn't the land that God had promised the children of Israel. The land on the other side of the Jordan was the land that God had promised Israel. And he says, really, what you're doing is that you're keeping others from doing what God's asked them to do by going into the land. And that was going to take faith. It was going to take a great amount of trust. It was going to take crossing the Jordan when it was at full height. And when you get to Joshua, he's going to have the priests carrying the ark, and he's going to tell them, walk across the Jordan, and the river's still flowing full speed at its height. And it wasn't until the priests stuck their foot in the water with the ark on their shoulder that the waters of the Jordan stopped. And all of the people crossed the Jordan on dry land. It was going to be, I'm going to obey the Lord in spite of what I see. And so they're walking over you've seen that this river that's flowing at its highest point. It'll take you away with the current. And God says, step out into the water. And they step out just like the Lord told them. And then God intervenes. And God was teaching them that in order for them to live lives to be fulfilled, to be where God wanted them to be, it was going to be a journey of faith constantly. And if you're going to live a life that's what God intended it to be, if you're going to reach the potential that God has for your life, it's going to be a constant journey of faith. As for you, as for me. Right? It's going to be a constant journey of trusting the Lord when it doesn't make sense. It's going to be a constant, nudging whenever we have the temptation to get comfortable. In our walk with the Lord, or in our commitment to the Lord, or our service to the Lord, there's always going to be, you know what? You can't get comfortable here. This isn't our home. Our home's heaven. And as long as we're here, we're in a battle. And when you start to put your roots here, man, that's when the danger sets in. And it's interesting that he would confront them here. He says, look, you're going to discourage them from reaching the land which the Lord has given them. Look what he says in verse 8, and I think here's another exhortation in verse 8. He says, thus your fathers did when I sent them away from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. When they went up to the valley of Eshcol and they saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel so that they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger was aroused on that day, and he swore an oath, saying, surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years of old and above shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. Except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. So the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. He says, did you guys realize what you're doing? You're acting just like your forefathers acted. You're going to bring discouragement to the whole camp if you guys don't go into the battle with us and you don't go and take the land with us. You're going to have a negative impact, and we're going to have the same results as our forefathers had when they wandered in the desert for 40 years because of their lack of faith. Is that really what you want to do? Are you ready for another lap around the mountain? I mean, after 40 years, you kind of think, okay, I've done enough laps around the mountain. And he's going, but what you guys are doing is the very same thing that your mom and dad did. You're not willing to trust the Lord. You're not willing to walk by faith. And look what he says in verse 14. Man. And look, you have risen in your father's place a brood of sinful men to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. He says, what you guys are doing isn't just a lack of faith. What you're doing is sinful. Because what's going to happen is that you're going to cause fear to penetrate the whole camp. And your actions are going to have an impact upon your brother, and you're going to be held accountable for those actions. Wow. And not only that, the Lord is going to bring another judgment, and it's going to have an impact upon not only the other 10 tribes, but upon your own sons and your own daughters. Man, what a lesson. What a lesson. Now, one of the things you notice that Moses is doing to them is he's bringing an argument against what they're planning on doing. He's coming and just saying, look, do you guys realize what exactly is taking place? You're gonna sit here while they go to war. You're willing to discourage all of the camp of Israel, and then you're willing for the wrath of God to be poured out upon the whole nation now. And he's giving them this warning, and he's giving them this exhortation to hopefully sway their hearts from doing what they're planning on doing, or what they've asked to do. Notice what happens in verse 15. For if you turn away from following him, we will once again leave them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all the people. And they came near to him, and they said, we will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones. But we ourselves will be armed, ready to go before the children of Israel until we have brought them into their place, and our little ones will dwell in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not turn to our homes until every one of the children of Israel has received his inheritance, for we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan beyond, because our inheritance has fallen to us on the eastern side of the Jordan. And Moses said to them, if you do this thing, if you arm yourself before the Lord for the war, and all your armed men cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then afterwards you may return and be blameless before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. So it seems as though, Moses gives them this exhortation. He says, man, is this really what you guys want to do? You want to, kind of stop from fulfilling God's purpose and God's plan? He said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go with you guys to battle. But we're not going to take our wives, and we're not going to take our children with us. We're going to leave them on this side of the Jordan. But we'll go to war with you guys, and we'll fight this battle with you. And then after the battle's been fought and everyone's got their inheritance, and then what we'll do is we'll come back to our land over here. And Moses was agreeable to it. He said, at least you're not going to neglect your responsibility to go to war with us. But in reality, what they don't realize they're doing is that they're putting their families in danger by not entering the promised land. One of the things you'll notice, you go through the history of Israel, is that the first place to be overtaken would be on the other side of the Jordan. The tribes that stood behind were the first ones that were vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy, rather than being in the midst of the promised land where they had God's protection upon them. It's interesting that Moses would go, okay, if you're willing to do that, then we'll do it. At least you're not neglecting the whole, but what you're really neglecting is your own family. What you're really neglecting is your own wives and your own children. Wow. And I think there was a responsibility that they had to the whole. And I think, guys, there's something there within that context for us as the body of Christ as a whole, that we have a responsibility to one another. That we have a responsibility to be faithful with the things that God's given us. To be those who understand that the Lord's the one who gives everything. And that if I'm faithful with the things he gives me, then, I'm going to be part of something way bigger than myself, and I'm building the kingdom of heaven, and I'm just one piece of this puzzle. But if I'm not faithful, with what God's put in front of me, then I'm going to affect everybody else too. Have you guys ever read the story of the gentleman who owns Hobby Lobbies? His whole business is based upon, biblical principles, and from the very beginning of his business, he's established that they're going to honor the Lord in everything they do. He was the one who fought against the health care bill that was commanding or demanding that they provide abortions for their employees, and he won that battle against the government when they were trying to force him to do that. And what's incredible is that this man, I was reading an article, just came, one of the emails I get on a regular basis was talking about that it's believed that he's, over his lifetime, has given over $500 million to Christian ministry. $500 million. I mean, the guy's, close to a billionaire, and he's given, $500 million. And I was reading the article, and they were saying that he has a litmus test. He'll ask the ministry who asks him for help. He'll go and say, what do you believe? And they have to give their statement of faith. And if they're in agreement with biblical doctrine, then he said, man, we'll try to help you. But to be entrusted with that kind of responsibility, and yet to be faithful. And one of the things he said in that article, he says, look, I realize something, that everything I've been given has been given to me by God. How can I try to keep it to myself? Wow. And if we really believe that everything I've been given has been given to me by God, then that makes you a steward of God's possessions, and God's talents, and God's gifts that He's instilled within you. And how can you and I say, I don't want to give what God gave to me to others, or to bless others, or to support the work that God's put in front of me. I want to hoard it. I mean, that's just unfaithfulness. And that's what these children of Gad were doing, and the children of Reuben. Because their life was impacting others. Their decision was going to impact others, for good or for evil. Could you imagine if everyone in the body of Christ was faithful with the things that God entrusted them, what we can do for the kingdom of heaven? The impact we can have in missions and in outreach and doing all the things that God, if everyone was as faithful with what God has entrusted to them as this gentleman who owns Hobby Lobby. Can you imagine the impact we can have in the world as a church as a whole? And the sad reality, and the Barnes and all of these companies who do the surveys, they said most Christians give 2% of their income to the ministry. Can you imagine? 2%. Imagine if everyone gave as God blessed them. And what's incredible is, what these guys are dealing with. Look, if you're going to do the minimum, just go to war with us, and we'll call it good. That's basically what he's saying. You're not going to go into the promised land with us. You're not going to inherit the land with us. But you're going to do the minimum that you got to do. Then we'll be okay. Notice what happens. Verse 23. But if you do not do so, then take note. You have sinned against the Lord. And be sure, your sin will find you out. Wow. Could you imagine? Moses wasn't even going to pull a punch here. He says, okay, if you do what you said, we're good. But if you don't understand what you're doing, you're sinning against God, and you're going to have a price to pay, man. Man, what an exhortation that Moses would give to the children of Gad and the children of Reuben. Now, why would Moses be so stern? How many times do we say something and we never plan to actually, we actually plan on doing it, we just never do it. How many times we go, oh yeah, from now on, man, that's it. I'm gonna give to the Lord. I'm gonna serve the Lord. I'm gonna be at every Sunday, every Wednesday. I'm gonna use my gifts. I'm gonna use my talents for the Lord. And then, that was on Sunday, and then by Thursday, it's already yesterday's news. And so Moses is going, look, you're going to make a promise here, man. We're going to hold you to that promise. You're going to make a commitment here. You're going to say something with your words. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you follow through what you said. And so understand something, man. If you don't do this, you're sinning against God. And not only that, your sin is going to find you out. Man, what an incredible principle that Moses lays out right here. You know, guys, you can never hide your sin. Your sin will always find you out. You might get away with it for a week or a month or a year. You might even get away with it for the rest of your lifetime. But you're going to stand before God one day, and your sin will find you out. You will give an account, and I will give an account. And what's incredible is that Moses is going to give them the permission, but I don't think it was Moses's blessings per se to say this is God's best for you. He was saying this is going to be permissible for you. And I think for all of us, guys, I think there's the perfect will of God and there's the permissible will of God. The perfect will of God is when we're following and seeking and obedient and we're just excelling in the things that God's put before us. But the permissible will of God is that I'm going to let you do that, but you'll never reach the potential that I had for you. That's permissible. God's not going to force us to do anything. He'll permit you to do it, but it'll never be what God had planned or intended for your life. And it's incredible because he's laying out for them, look, be sure of this. Your sin will find you out. Look at verse 24. And he says, build your cities for your little ones, the folds for your sheep. Do what was proceeded out of your mouth. The children of Gad, the children of Reuben spoke to Moses, saying, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our little ones, our wives, our flocks, and all of our livestock will be there in the cities of Gilead. But your servant will cross over, every man armed for war, before the Lord to battle, just as my Lord says. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest, to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the chief fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel. And Moses said to them, if the children of Gad and the children of Reuben cross over the Jordan with you, every man armed for battle before the Lord, and the Lord is subdued before you, then you shall give them the land of Gilead as a possession. But if they do not cross over armed with you, they shall have possessions among you in the land of Canaan. And the children of Gad and the children of Reuben answered, saying, as the Lord has said to your servants, so we will do. We will cross over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, but the possessions of our inheritance shall remain with us on this side of the Jordan. So Moses gave to the children of Gad, to the children of Reuben, and to half the tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land with its cities, with its borders, the cities surrounding country. And the children of Gad built Dibon and Ataroth and Aror, Atroth and Shophan and Jazer and Jogbeah, Beth Nimrah and Beth Haran, fortified cities and folds for sheep. And the children of Reuben built Heshbon and Elilah and Kirjathim, Nebo and Baal Neon, their names being changed to Shibmah. And they gave other names to the cities which we built. And the children of Mishur, the sons of Manasseh, went to Gilead, and they took it and possessed the Amorites who were in it. So Moses gave Gilead to Mishur, the son of Manasseh, and he dwelt in it. Also Jair, the son of Manasseh, went and took its small towns and called them Havoth Jair. Then Nobab went and took Kenath and its villages, and he called it Nobah after his own name. And you notice by the time they got done, it wasn't just Reuben and Gad. Now Manasseh is going, hey, I want some land here too. And it was beginning to have an impact upon the rest of the tribes. Now, luckily that was all that was impacted, was half the tribe of Manasseh, who also, got some of the land on that side of the Jordan rather than going to the promised land. And it's just incredible, because we come now at the end of chapter 32. He's going to give us a recount of all of the places that the children of Israel traveled in the 40 years. He's going to go all the way through this whole scenario, this whole picture. And we're not going to read it in detail, but I want to do just kind of lay out the beginning and then get to the end and then tie this all together. Watch what he says. And these are the journeys of the children of Israel, who went out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. Moses wrote down the starting points of their journey at the commandment of the Lord, and these are the journey according to their starting points. They departed from Ramses in the first month of the 15th day of the first month. On the day after Passover, the children of Israel went out with boldness in the sight of all the Egyptians. The Egyptians were burying all of their firstborn, whom the Lord had killed among them. Also all their gods the Lord had executed judgment. Now think about this. All of the judgments that came on Egypt were a direct hit on all of the gods that they were worshiping. The animals, the livestock, the God of thunder, the God of rain, the God of harvest. God was just attacking every single one of their gods at that point. Everything they worshipped was now under attack. And he reminds us of that right here. God executed judgment on all the gods of Egypt. And then the firstborn of all the sons of Egypt, were killed on that night, and the children of Israel left. And then he goes through, and you can read that on your own just for leisure reading, all the way to verse 37, 38. He continues, and he reminds them that in verse 38 that Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor in the command of the Lord, and he died there in the 14th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt. On the 40th year, after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, on the first day of the first month. And it was Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. So we have the picture of their, all of their journeys all the way through. Aaron dies, and then we're eventually going to get here, by the time we're done with Numbers, that that Moses also is going to die. Now look at verse 50, and here's what I want to just kind of wrap this up with. Watch what God's going to instruct. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho. That's where they're camped now. He says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Destroy all their engraved stones. Destroy all of their molded images. Demolish all of their high places. You shall dispose the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it, for I have given you the land to possess. You shall divide the land by lot as an inheritance among your families. To the larger you shall give a larger inheritance, to the lesser, to the smaller you shall give a smaller inheritance. There everyone's inheritance shall be whatever falls on him by lot. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns on your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. Wow. Think about and this really is the last instructions that Moses is giving the children of Israel. He's telling them, look, guys, you've been given this great responsibility. You're going to go into the promised land. God has given you all of the land. He's going to give it to them by portion according to the size that they have. And God's going to choose the land that they're going to get. And he's going to divide this whole thing up. And he says, let me just tell you something, man. If you don't eradicate the enemy from the land, they will come back and they will be your worst nightmare. They will destroy you, man. They will be thorns. They will be, how does he say that? There'll be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides. Because they're going to be your worst nightmare. Now God's going to tell them, you have to wipe out everybody. Now, guys, the picture here for us is that all of the inhabitants of Canaan were given over to idolatry, to sin. They were given over to the flesh. They were given over to their own passions and their own pursuits. And what God is saying is, look, you can't intermingle with these things. You can't coexist with these things. They got to be removed completely. And I think in our own lives, you think about what God is asking of us, to live lives that are holy. And you can't compromise with sin and think that somehow that sin isn't going to come back and have a negative impact upon your life. A little bit of sin leavens the whole lump. And it will be the thing that causes destruction upon your life. You start to play with sin, and that sin will just continue to grow and grow and grow so that it begins to own you. It becomes your master. And God is going to tell the children of Israel, if you deal with this lightly, you allow the idolaters just to continue to hang out on the outskirts, eventually they're going to grow in power, and they're going to be the irritants in your eyes, they're going to be the thorns in your flesh. And God has called you and I to live lives that are holy and not to get comfortable in this world, but to keep pushing forward, because this isn't our home. He was going to tell the Galatians, he says, look, he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. He who sows to the Spirit of the Spirit will reap everlasting life. And watch what he says next. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those of the household of faith. I love that exhortation in Galatians 6:8, because really what he's saying is, look, whatever you're sowing in your life, that's what's going to come out of your life. You're sowing to the flesh, you're going to reap the corruption that the flesh eventually brings upon every life. You're sowing to the Spirit, you're going to reap everlasting life. And then he goes on and he says, look, don't grow weary. Why does he tell us not to grow weary? Because that's the tendency. We just kind of like, man, I'm tired. Man, I want to break. I want to relax a little bit. I want to, I earned it. I deserved it. I should be able to indulge a little bit. And the moment you start to indulge a little bit, then the enemy takes that and he uses a stronghold to take a little bit more. And that just begins to permeate so that eventually it brings death, corruption. And so his encouragement says, don't grow weary while doing good. Why? Because in due season, we're going to reap if we don't lose heart. We're going to reap everlasting life. We're going to reap the things that are eternal and good. And I need to be reminded of that at times. I need to be reminded that, you know what, you just stay the course, man. You know what, it is weary. Sometimes you do get tired. Sometimes you do want to kind of take a vacation from holiness. But if you don't lose heart and you stay that course, man, one day, you're going to get to the end. And you're going to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter in to the joy of the Lord. And when that day comes, man, everything that you endured behind you means nothing now. Because you finally finished your course. You finally finished your race. And if we would just be the men and women who say, I'm just going to stay my course. I'm going to be faithful with the little things. I'm not going to settle here. I'm not going to settle for second best and just want to get by. I want to live by faith. I want to trust God. I want to see what He wants for my life, and I want to see what He would accomplish if I would just be wholly surrendered to Him. I believe it was G. Campbell Morgan was attending a service, and he was listening to Charles Spurgeon preach. And G. Campbell Morgan was a young man, and G. Campbell Morgan heard Spurgeon say, God has yet to find a man who's given his life completely over to Him. Oh, what would happen if God were to find that man? And G. Campbell Morgan, a young man at the time wanting to serve the Lord, he said these words, oh, that I would be that man. And may that be our prayer, guys, that we would be that man, that woman, to see what God would do with a life that is wholly surrendered over to Him.